Hello and welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about items, champions, and the interaction between items and champions. Specifically, what I want to talk about is an interesting view that can help you understand a bit how I tend to look at items and champions. So, we got a lot of changes for the items in this patch specifically, and some of them are going to be very good for our example here. So what we're trying to look at is whether an item is enabling a champion is enabling an item, or maybe neither really, or maybe both, right? So what I mean by that is, for example, Bork is an item that you try to play for, right? So let's say that you have a multi-hit effect, or you have a lot of attack speed, right? You're kind of enabling Bork to do a lot more, especially if you're melee. Similarly, you have these items like, for example, I don't know, IE or something, right? Where your champion can maybe just enable it. So like Yasuo or Yone or something, they double your crit chance, so suddenly that item is very good on them, and you are basically an IE carrier. So you carry the IE item, and you let the IE item make you do a lot of damage. Oppositely, you have items that will kind of just bolster your kit. So for example, Static Shiv is an item that just gives you a lot of stats a lot of the time, and that will mean that a lot of the champions that end up buying the Static Shiv are going to just get a lot of stats, which allow the champion to just basically do more, kind of, right? But it's not really going to alter their gameplay. The passive part of Static Shiv is going to, of course, do that with the wave player thing and the little bolt proc, whatever. But the stats themselves are going to just amplify the gameplay. And that's kind of like two different things that champions tend to have as an interaction with items. So some good examples of this to showcase that can be these champions I've selected here. So we have Ezreal, right? Ezreal will sometimes build a decent amount of AD, and sometimes Ezreal will build a pretty standard like Sheen whatever build, right? That's like pretty common. So we look at his specific stats, right? So what does he gain from building items? Okay, well he's just gaining a decent amount of damage on every spell, but nothing really too crazy, right, that we can play for. At the same time, he's also got some on-hit effects, but nothing really too crazy, right? He gets some attack speed, but for the most part, it's pretty balanced. So you think about it and you're like, well, if I stack AD on this champion, right? Yeah, I'll do a lot of damage, but nothing really too crazy. Also, the site always loads like 10 ads for me, like this. I don't know. And then it just fucks up. That's crazy. Um, yeah, basically, we can't really find anything that's like too abusive here. So instead, what we do is we have these items that enable the way he wants to play. So say like Trinity, whatever, right? Like it gives us a bit of every stat, and we kind of want a bit of every stat because we already have a bit of every stat. So we have some attack speed, we have some AD ratios, we have some AP ratios, we want some HP. We're pretty short range, we're pretty mobile, we want some CDR because the champion likes to spam spells, and it's pretty good for us. Now, opposite of that, we have Jinx, right? Both in the game mode Swarm and in the actual game, Jinx was usually a champion that just kind of like abused items, let's say, and was just like there to let items do their thing, to let items shine, kind of. So let's say, for example, her passive, right? She gets total attack speed rather than getting whatever else, right? I don't know, bonus attack speed or base attack speed or whatever. She gets total attack speed. So all the attack speed you build, she keeps getting more and more passive attack speed, right? Every time she gets a takedown. So that means if you build a lot of attack speed, you're going to get even more attack speed from her passive. And that basically kind of just makes it so if you build, as I said, a lot of attack speed, you're going to get rewarded. Then opposite of that, we have her W and her ult, right? These two spells have a crazy amount of, say, AD ratio, right? So if we look, we have this AD ratio for the primary target and AD ratio for the secondary target. And both of them are pretty high. On top of that, we also have its AD ratio on her W, which is also 160%. So if we combine those two AP ratios, or rather AD ratios, we end up at something like 325% for one target, and then also an AoE. And that's going to mean that we're going to do a very large burst. So why do people build sometimes lethality on Jinx these days? Well, because she has a very high AD ratio here on a long range. That's pretty spammable as well, right? And her cooldowns are pretty low on them. So all she's really missing is one stat to do a lot of damage. Right. Similarly, we then have ADC Jinx, right? She goes for crit chance, she goes for AD, and she goes for some attack speed. And what is she really trying to do there? Well, we want some attack speed because it feeds into this. We still need some AD so that our items make us do some kind of damage with auto attacks, right? But what are we looking for? We're looking for the 110% AD modified bonus physical damage. That's kind of like splash damage as well. So again, clean up, and again, she's enabling some items, right? And the items themselves don't really matter, and her playstyle herself doesn't really matter. It's more just about she has a very good kit to deliver the item's effect to the enemy, right? Whereas on Ezreal, we don't really care about the item's effect. We kind of just play the Ezreal champion, and then everything else is just there to supply some shortcoming of him or to amplify his strengths. So let's say, how do we really reason into buying the items Ezreal buys? First item, oh, well, we kind of like poking, right? And we like to just isolate it, try to Q them. We want to kind of just have like a bit of every stat because we're not really missing any stat, but we could use more of every stat, right? And it's pretty simple to see how Trinity could be a pretty good solution for that, right? Because you have spells that you can poke with from long range. You can, for example, W from long range. You can E, and then you can auto attack, and the auto attack will proc Sheen. You can also just like randomly Q while you're farming or whatever, and you will proc Sheen, right? And it just makes sense with his gameplay, which would be his gameplay anyway, even if you didn't buy those items. Then, what about next item? Well, we need mana, so we could really use an item that gives us some kind of mana, because otherwise we'll be perma-oo. Okay, so that's a problem. What else? We could use like quite a bit of AD, because our champion does have AD scalings on every single ability. We can also use whatever else, like AP or whatever, sure. But is there a good AP item with mana? Probably not that gives us a good effect, right? So the best solution here we have is Manamune, because it gives us the most damage. And it gives us mana, which we need. And then so on. We need CDR later for more rotations and fights and so on. And then we have Karthus, which is an interesting example in my opinion, because he can do a bit of both. So he can be an item carrier, or he can be the champion that gets buffed themselves. So a really... what the fuck, I hate this. What the fuck? A really easy way to see this was Swarm, and that's why I mentioned it before, because in Swarm, you had champions, like if you remember, and you played it, that, let's say, Jinx, right, in Swarm? Funny that it happens to be Jinx as well. In Swarm, she gave a lot of CDR, and that CDR would make the items from a cycle. And since the items would cycle a lot, she kind of just wanted to get good items, and then she just wanted to enable them with her passive procs. And that's what I mean. Like, she plays for the items themselves. But there were other champions, say like Riven or something, that played for their kit, and the items would just enable their kit. So the primary gameplay would then be the champion themselves. In Karthus' example, a lot of the time, he was actually an item carrier. So he was enabling Liandry's, because he has a lot of AoE. He also is allowed to die and then keep doing damage, and so on. So in that case, you're buying Liandry's, you're placing down your Wall of Pain, reducing their MR, which is already good, on a percentage HP proc item, And on top of that, you're perma-procking the item with your E. Pretty simple, right? And you're also procking with ult. Pretty good. Now, sometimes Cortis was a bit different. So he would then be the champion himself and playing for his own spells, right? So for Q and whatever, and maybe for ult or something, right? And instead of proccing those items, he would be just doing a lot of damage. So say he would buy a lot of pen and stuff, right? So say this is more of a Ludens type of thing. So when, for example, the jungle item with the Ludens proc was in the game, he would do a lot more of that, right? And similarly, he could do a lot of that last split because Leandris was kind of not giving mana, so rushing it was a bit unideal. So then you had like, okay, do I go Towards? Do I go Leandris anyway if I'm jungle? Do I go like Malignants, right? And they would kind of provide him different things. Now, what are we really taking away from this? We're not really trying to take away something specific, but we are trying to look at items and champions in a bit of a different way. And maybe this gives you a, say, good perspective on these things, and also on the new changes, because I see a lot of people seem to be quite confused on the new changes, like what's good now, what's not good now, what do these changes really mean, right? And if you think of these changes in these ways, then it's going to really tell you what champions are going to benefit, right? So for example, a champion that is going to play for their own kit and just have the item enable what they want to do is going to be a lot better than a champion that's trying to just abuse the item themselves, right? And just play for the item completely, right? So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll maybe make a longer video next time. This time I just wanted to talk about this little concept. And yeah, take care. Bye bye.